The glass was still warm when Imani noticed the lipstick. Not on Graham's mouth, not on his collar, on the rim of a heavy-bottomed whiskey glass, sitting alone on the marble island, an unmistakable smear of deep berry red, glossy and deliberate, the kind of color Imani had never worn in her life. The apartment was quiet in that expensive way, the kind of silence that hummed with hidden machinery and money. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Lake Michigan reflected the last light of a Chicago evening, steel blue and indifferent. Imani stood barefoot on the cool stone floor, groceries slipping in her hands, and felt something inside her body register the moment before her mind did. This glass did not belong to her, and whatever had touched it did not belong here. She didn't move at first. She listened to the soft whir of the wine fridge, to the muted traffic 12 stories below, to her own breath, suddenly shallow. Then faintly from the direction of Graham's office, his voice, low, relaxed, intimate. Imani set the grocery bags down without a sound. She walked slowly, the way you do when you're afraid the truth might hear you coming and disappear. The office door was ajar by just an inch. Through the crack, she saw him leaning back in his chair, jacket off, sleeves rolled up, phone pressed to his ear, smiling. It was the smile she remembered from years ago, the one he used when he thought he was winning. "She's brilliant," Graham said, amused, "but she's not the brand." Imani stopped breathing. "She's technical, serious, necessary, sure, but people don't invest in engineers. They invest in vision, in confidence, in a face they can trust." A pause, a quiet laugh from the other end of the line. "No," he continued lightly, "Imani doesn't suspect a thing. She's loyal, always has been, and honestly, she's nothing without Hale Urban. Nothing." The word landed like a blunt object to the chest. No drama, no echo, just impact. It wasn't shouted, it wasn't cruel in tone. It was worse than that, it was casual, certain, like a fact he'd repeated often enough that it no longer required thought. Imani stepped back, her hand braced against the wall. For a split second the room tilted, and with it the last 5 years of her life. Every late night recalculating load paths, every mass timber model refined and re-refined, every introduction she'd made, every door she'd opened and then stepped through behind him. Nothing without him. If you've ever felt that kind of moment, when the floor drops out and you realize the story you thought you were living was never yours to begin with, stay with me. And if stories about quiet betrayal, stolen credit, and the slow reclaiming of self speak to something personal for you, you might want to like this, leave a comment, or follow along. Not because of me, but because stories like this have a way of reminding us we're not alone. Imani retreated down the hall, her pulse loud in her ears, and returned to the kitchen. The lipstick-marked glass waited for her under the pendant lights, damning and absurdly ordinary. She picked it up, turning it slowly. The mark was fresh, confident, the kind of mark someone leaves when they believe they'll never be questioned. Her phone buzzed. A calendar notification Graham had shared months ago, auto-synced and forgotten. Investor prep, private, scheduled for earlier that afternoon, in their apartment. Her reflection stared back at her from the dark window. Black woman, 34, hair pulled back in a practical twist, wearing a sweatshirt with the logo of a sustainable engineering conference she'd spoken at once, long before she'd started introducing herself as we instead of I. She thought of the pitch deck Graham was circulating right now, the one featuring the riverfront redevelopment, the mass timber system she had designed from scratch, the carbon-negative calculations she'd fought city inspectors over. Her work rendered beautiful and anonymous. The glass trembled slightly in her hand. In the office, Graham laughed again. "Exactly," he said. "I'll handle it." That was when Imani did something she had never done before. She opened the voice recorder on her phone. Just 12 seconds. That was all she captured. His voice, clear as day, saying her name, and then erasing it in the same breath. She stopped the recording almost immediately, heart hammering, unsure why she'd done it, only knowing that some instinct older than politeness, older than loyalty, had finally woken up. In the kitchen, she set the glass down exactly where it had been. She didn't confront him. She didn't cry. She didn't throw anything. She washed her hands slowly, deliberately, as if preparing for surgery. Because somewhere between the lipstick on that glass and the certainty in his voice, Imani Ward understood something with terrifying clarity. This wasn't just about another woman. This was about authorship, ownership, and the cost of letting someone else tell the story of your life. And before the night was over, the story Graham thought he controlled was already beginning to fracture. By morning, the glass was gone. Not thrown away, Graham didn't do mess. It had been washed, dried, returned to the cabinet with the rest of the perfect set, as if the lipstick had never existed. As if the evidence could be rinsed clean the way he rinsed clean everything that threatened the narrative he lived inside. Imani stood in the kitchen with a mug of coffee she couldn't taste and watched him move through the apartment like the place belonged to his momentum. He wore a charcoal suit and the expression of a man who believed the day was already won. He kissed her cheek, quick, automatic, a gesture that looked like affection from a distance and felt like a brand stamp up close. "Big week," he said, adjusting his cufflinks. "We're on the edge of something huge." Imani nodded. She had learned how to nod the way people learn a second language, fluently, without thought, even when the words mean something different than they used to. Because "we" was a magic trick. "We" made his hunger look like partnership. "We" made her labor feel like love. He slid his phone into his pocket and glanced at her like she was part of the checklist. "You good?" It wasn't concern, it was inventory. "I'm fine," she said, because she had said it so many times it had become a reflex. A protective lie she wore the way she wore neutral lipstick. To avoid attention, to avoid consequences, to avoid being called dramatic. Graham's company, Hale Urban, had an entire department devoted to avoiding consequences. They didn't call it that, of course. They called it reputation management. They called it protecting the brand. And the brand was Graham, clean-lined, confident, inevitable. Imani had helped build that inevitability. She remembered when Hale Urban had been a smaller thing, almost humble. Back then, when Graham's office was a rented suite with carpet that smelled like old coffee, when his pitch decks were full of adjectives and not yet full of money. He'd been charming in those days, a white American man with Midwest polish and ambition sharpened to a blade. He talked about the city like it was something he loved, not something he meant to own. And Imani had been the one with the math, the credentials, the stubborn devotion to building things that didn't poison the future. She'd earned her reputation the slow way. Long nights, hard exams, rooms where she was the only black woman and had to be twice as precise just to be considered half as serious. She specialized in mass timber and low-carbon structures, the kind of engineering that made old-school developers roll their eyes until the incentives and headlines began to favor it. Her work didn't just hold buildings up, it held narratives up. It made vision possible without collapsing into fraud. Graham liked to say he believed in her. The first time he said it, it sounded like admiration. Now she understood it had always been possession. On his way out, he paused, almost as an afterthought. "Oh, Liv is coming to the office today. Brand alignment meeting. She may ask you a few questions, just keep it simple." Keep it simple, meaning don't complicate the story with your presence. The door clicked shut behind him. The apartment exhaled, and Imani did what she had not allowed herself to do in years. She opened her laptop and searched her own name. Not on Google, in their shared drive. She typed Imani into the project folder for the riverfront redevelopment, the one the city council was praising as a model for climate-conscious development. The one journalists were already calling Hale's new signature. Dozens of files appeared, structural calculations, material schedules, carbon life cycle reports, iterative models with timestamps that mapped months of her life. Her fingerprints were everywhere in the metadata, version histories, tracked changes, comment threads where she'd corrected assumptions and saved them from expensive mistakes. But the cover pages had one name, Graham Hale. Under Project Lead, his name was bold and centered, like a monument. Under Engineering, it read Internal Team. Under Consultants, her firm name appeared once, buried in the last third of the deck, in small gray type that looked designed to be overlooked. She scrolled further. A slide titled Innovation, another titled Breakthrough, another titled What Makes Hale Urban Different. Every one of them was her work, translated into his voice. Imani's throat tightened. Not because she was surprised. Surprise was a luxury you only got once. But because she could suddenly see the pattern as a complete thing, clean and ruthless. He didn't steal in the way people imagine thieves stealing. There were no dramatic demands, no threats at first. There was only a steady rearranging of credit, a gentle nudging of language, a gradual shifting of Imani built this into we built this, into Graham built this. And every time she tried to name the theft, he softened his eyes and called her tired. You're overthinking. Don't make it weird. You know how investors are. This helps both of us. Both of us. Another magic phrase, another spell. She clicked into an email chain from the previous year, the one that had kept her awake for weeks. A critical redesign of a timber joint system that allowed the entire structure to meet fire code without sacrificing the aesthetic. The breakthrough had been hers alone, late-night sketches and simulation runs, revisions until her eyes burned. She remembered sending it to Graham at 2:14 a.m., her message careful, professional, excited in spite of exhaustion. His reply came at 7:02 a.m. Great, I'll present this to the team. Below that, another email to investors forwarded later the same morning, her diagrams attached, her language paraphrased, her name absent. A chill moved through her, slow and absolute. This wasn't just personal betrayal. It was industrial, efficient, a machine designed to convert her brilliance into his authority. Imani leaned back and stared at the ceiling, trying to locate the moment she'd agreed to this. The moment she'd told herself it was love, or strategy, or patience, instead of what it was, erasure. Her phone buzzed again. A message from a colleague she hadn't spoken to in months, someone from the sustainable engineering community. Congrats on Hale's nomination. That timber work is insane. Proud of you guys. Imani read it twice. Nomination. She opened her inbox and searched for the words award and AIA and Chicago Design Excellence. What she found made her stomach drop. An automated press packet attached to a PR email scheduled for release. Headline: Graham Hale redefines sustainable luxury with revolutionary timber design. In the body, her work was described as supported by Hale Urban's internal engineering capabilities. Supported, as if she were the scaffolding around his genius, temporary and disposable, meant to be removed once the building stood. Imani's hands went cold. She closed the email, opened the voice recording from the night before. 12 seconds of truth, small and fragile, but real. She's nothing without Hale Urban. She listened once, then again. And somewhere inside her, beneath the shock, beneath the grief, beneath the old training that told her to endure, something hardened into focus. If he had built a brand by erasing her, then the only way to survive was to stop being erasable. Imani turned back to the shared drive. Her cursor hovered over the folder settings, over permissions, over download logs, over the quiet architecture of control. She didn't make a move yet, not one that would announce itself, but she began to map the territory like a woman preparing for war. Because in Chicago, reputations were skyscrapers, tall, glittering, and often built on foundations no one wanted to inspect. And Imani was done holding up a building that didn't even have her name on the door. The conference room on the 41st floor smelled like money and citrus cleaner. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Chicago River as if it were part of the presentation. water moving obediently between towers of steel and glass, the city reduced to a backdrop for whatever story Graham intended to sell today. The table was already set when Imani arrived. Leather chairs spaced just wide enough to suggest importance, not comfort. Chilled water, branded notebooks, pens aligned with surgical precision. This was where futures were decided. This was where her work went to lose its name. Graham stood at the head of the room, jacket buttoned, posture relaxed in that practiced way men learn when they've been told their confidence reads as leadership. He glanced up when Imani entered and smiled, brief, reassuring, proprietary. "You ready?" he asked. She nodded. She always nodded. Her tablet felt heavier than it should have in her hands, loaded with months of calculations, diagrams, and contingency plans that made the entire project viable. Without them, the riverfront redevelopment was just another glass monument to ego. With them, it was a landmark. Mass timber rising where concrete once dominated. Carbon negative, city approved, profitable. The investors filed in, one by one, 5 of them, all polished, all curious, all trained to evaluate people as much as numbers. Introductions were exchanged, hands shaken, titles recited like prayers. "And this," Graham said smoothly, gesturing toward her, "is Imani. She supports our engineering efforts." Supports. The words slipped into the room unnoticed, light as dust. It didn't stop the meeting. It didn't change anyone's expression, but it lodged in Imani's chest and stayed there, pressing. She took her seat 2 chairs down from Graham, exactly where he'd placed her. Not beside him, not across. Adjacent. Assistive. The screen lit up with the first slide, a rendering of the riverfront, sunlight breaking across warm timber lines, green terraces cascading down the facade. The room leaned forward. "This project," Graham began, "represents a new chapter for Chicago. Sustainable luxury that doesn't compromise returns." Imani watched the numbers appear, the life cycle cost savings, the emissions reductions, the fire resistance modeling that had taken weeks of negotiation with inspectors who didn't trust new methods from Black women with quiet voices. Graham spoke with confidence about solutions he had not built, risks he had not mitigated, challenges he had not set up at 3 in the morning solving. Her work flowed out of him as if it had always belonged there. When the investors asked about the timber system, Graham answered. When they asked about zoning hurdles, Graham answered. When they asked about structural resilience, Graham answered, using her language, softened, simplified, made palatable. Imani interjected once, gently, to clarify a technical assumption. Graham didn't look at her. He raised a hand, still smiling. "We've accounted for that," he said, moving on. The presentation advanced. Slide after slide, her ideas appeared, scrubbed clean of origin. The phrasing had changed just enough to feel like translation, not theft. This was how it was done. This was how credit evaporated without anyone ever seeing the smoke. Halfway through, one of the investors, a woman with sharp eyes and a voice that suggested she was used to being underestimated, leaned forward. "This timber system," she said, tapping the screen, "it's elegant, risky, but elegant. Who engineered it?" The room went still. Imani felt her pulse spike, loud in her ears. This was it. This was the moment when truth either surfaced or sank. Graham didn't hesitate. "We have a very strong internal team," he said. "Our approach is collaborative. I focus on vision and execution, and the team brings it to life." Team, not her. Not the woman sitting 3 feet away, heart pounding, hands steady only because she had trained them to be. The investor nodded slowly, satisfied enough. The moment passed. The meeting breathed again. But something inside Imani didn't. She looked down at her tablet and saw the reflection of her own face in the glass. Composed, neutral, professional. The kind of face that didn't demand credit. The kind of face people mistook for agreement. The pitch ended to enthusiasm. Numbers were discussed. Timelines proposed. A tentative commitment was made. Enough to guarantee headlines. Enough to lock momentum. Graham closed with charm and certainty, promising follow-ups, promising access, promising returns. As the investors stood to leave, the sharp-eyed woman paused beside Imani. "Impressive work," she said quietly. Imani opened her mouth to respond, to say thank you, to say yes, to say something that anchored the compliment to reality. Graham stepped in first. "Glad you think so," he said, hand already extended, already redirecting the moment back to himself. "We're very proud of what we're building." The investors smiled, nodded, and moved on. When the room finally emptied, Graham exhaled like a man who had just won something he'd always known was his. He turned to Imani, energy buzzing, triumphant. "That went perfectly," he said. "You were great. Great. Not brilliant. Not essential. Not indispensable. Great in the way people compliment furniture. Next time," he added lightly, "let me handle the room. You have a tendency to get too detailed. Investors don't need all that. Too detailed." Another careful correction. Another small erasure disguised as guidance. Imani gathered her tablet, her notes, her composure. She stood, feeling taller than she had any right to, given how small he was trying to make her. "They asked who engineered the system," she said, voice even. Graham waved a hand. "And they got the answer they needed. Trust me, this benefits both of us." Both of us. There it was again. The phrase that closed doors while pretending to open them. He checked his watch. "I have a call. Celebrate a little, okay? This is big." He left the room, humming with victory, already moving on to the next conquest. Imani stayed behind. She walked to the window and looked down at the river, at the city she had worked so hard to build responsibly, invisibly. She thought about the emails, the slides, the way her name had been softened into absence. Support. She rested her palm against the glass, feeling the faint vibration of the building, the weight of structure, of load paths, of forces held in balance by careful design. Buildings didn't stand by accident, neither did reputations. And as Imani watched the river slide past below, she understood with sudden, frightening clarity that if she didn't claim authorship soon, she would disappear inside the success she had engineered. The pitch had closed the deal. But it had also closed something else. Her willingness to stay quiet. The elevator ride down from the 41st floor took less than a minute, but it felt longer than the entire pitch. Imani stood alone. Her reflection stretched thin in the mirrored walls, tablet pressed against her chest like a shield. The numbers were still echoing in her head. Returns, timelines, valuations. But underneath them ran a quieter, more corrosive current. Support, team, collaborative. Words that sounded generous and meant nothing. Her phone buzzed before the doors even opened. "Perfect meeting. Proud of you." She stared at the screen as the elevator descended, the city's hum rising to meet her. "Proud of you." The phrase was so familiar it almost comforted her, like muscle memory. Almost. By the time she stepped onto the marble lobby floor, the message had already begun to feel like something else. A lid, a seal, a way to close the moment before it could open into something dangerous. Outside, Chicago was in full performance mode, late afternoon light bouncing off glass towers, traffic flowing with rehearsed impatience, the river catching flashes of sun like it had secrets to keep. Imani crossed the plaza slowly, her heels clicking against stone, every step measured. She could still see the investor's face in her mind, the way the woman had looked at her when she asked the question. Who engineered it? It hadn't been curiosity alone. It had been recognition. Imani replayed the moment again and again, not because she wanted to, but because her brain was trying to solve it. There had been a fork in the road. She could have spoken. She could have corrected him. She could have said, calmly and professionally, "I did." She knew the risks. She knew the calculus. She also knew what it would have cost him. And still, she hadn't. That truth pressed on her harder than Graham's smile ever had. Back at the apartment that evening, the lights were already on. Graham was in the kitchen, jacket off, sleeves rolled up, pouring himself a drink like a man celebrating a private victory. He looked up when she entered, eyes bright. "There she is," he said, My secret weapon. Secret weapon. The words were affectionate on the surface, but they carried a quiet implication she could no longer ignore. Secrets weren't acknowledged. Weapons weren't thanked. He handed her a glass of wine she hadn't asked for. She took it out of habit, then set it down untouched. They're interested, he continued, pacing now, energy still crackling from the meeting. Very interested. That commitment could turn into something serious. That's good, she said. It's more than good. It's momentum. He smiled, wide and easy, the smile people trusted. This is exactly how it's supposed to go. Imani leaned against the counter and watched him. Watched the way his confidence filled the room, pushing everything else to the edges. Watched how natural it was for him to stand at the center of things, even when the gravity came from somewhere else. They asked who engineered the timber system, she said again, quietly. Graham took a sip of his drink, unfazed. You didn't answer. He smiled, that same smooth, dodging smile she'd seen him use on city officials, journalists, donors. The smile that slid around truth instead of confronting it. I answered what mattered, he said. You have to think bigger than individual credit, Imani. This is about positioning. Positioning. Another word that looked neutral until you examine the cost. They were asking because it matters, she said. Because authorship matters. Graham chuckled softly, like she'd made a charming but naive point. To you, maybe. To them, they want stability, a single voice, a clear leader. And that leader is you, she said. He met her gaze, unbothered. Someone has to be. There it was. The truth, finally, delivered without ornament. He moved closer, lowering his voice the way he did when he wanted to sound reasonable. Look, I know this stuff feels personal to you. You're close to the work. But that's exactly why I handle the room. You get lost in the details. Lost. As if she were wandering instead of building. Imani felt something shift inside her. Subtle but irreversible. She thought of the voice recording on her phone. 12 seconds. Small. Dangerous. She thought of the slides with her work in his name. The way the investor had paused, had seen her. This project wouldn't exist without me, she said. Graham's smile tightened, just a fraction. That's not what I'm saying. It is, she replied. You're just saying it nicely. For a moment, something like irritation flickered across his face. Then it was gone, replaced by warmth. He reached out, touching her arm, grounding, familiar. You're tired, he said gently. You've been pushing yourself hard. Let's not turn a win into a problem. A problem. Her presence reframed as an inconvenience. Imani stepped back, breaking the contact. Her heart was beating faster now, but her voice stayed steady. I'm not tired. I'm paying attention. That gave him pause. Not fear, not guilt, calculation. He studied her the way he studied market trends, risks, opportunities. Then he smiled again, softer this time, conciliatory. Hey, he said, we're on the same side. The lie sat between them, perfectly polished. Imani nodded, not because she agreed, but because she understood something essential in that moment. The smile wasn't meant to reassure her. It was meant to dodge the truth until the truth no longer mattered. Later that night, alone in the bedroom, she opened her laptop and stared at the shared drive once more. At the files, the timestamps, the quiet evidence of her labor. She thought about what it would mean to speak up, to disrupt the narrative, to risk being labeled difficult, ungrateful, replaceable. She also thought about what it would mean not to. Outside, the city pulsed with borrowed light, buildings standing tall on foundations most people never saw. Imani lay back against the pillows, eyes open, mind racing, and let the weight of the choice settle fully into her bones. Because now she knew the truth. Graham's smile wasn't hiding the truth from others. It was hiding it from her. And the longer she let it work, the more invisible she would become. Liv Carter arrived on a Tuesday like a decision already made. Imani first saw her in the lobby of Hale Urban's headquarters, a restored Art Deco building Graham loved because it made him look like legacy. Liv stepped through the revolving doors in a cream trench coat that probably cost more than Imani's monthly rent in graduate school. Hair glossy, posture effortless, eyes scanning the space the way a strategist scans a battlefield. She didn't look lost. She looked installed. The receptionist straightened instinctively. Two junior associates in slim suits paused mid-conversation. Liv smiled at them, quick and bright, the kind of smile that suggested intimacy without offering it. Then her gaze found Graham, waiting by the elevator bank, and the temperature in the room shifted by half a degree, subtle but real. Graham moved toward her with the ease of a man greeting someone who belonged to him in public. "Liv," he said, voice warm. Perfect timing. "Graham." She leaned in for a cheek kiss that landed a little too close to the corner of his mouth. The gesture was small, but it wasn't casual. It was a message. Imani stood a few steps away, badge in hand, invisible in her own life like she'd been trained to be. Graham turned, as if remembering an accessory he'd forgotten to name. "Liv, this is Imani Ward," he said. "She supports our engineering side." Supports, again. Like a quiet bruise pressed twice in the same place. Liv extended her hand. Her nails were the same deep berry red as the lipstick Imani couldn't stop seeing in her mind, polished to a shine that looked expensive and intentional. The handshake was firm, confident, and slightly too long. "So nice to finally meet you," Liv said, eyes traveling over Imani's face with the appraisal of someone deciding what to do with a piece of furniture. "Graham talks about you." Imani forced a smile. "I'm sure." Liv's lips curved. "You're the reason he gets to sound visionary without getting sued by physics." It could have been a compliment. It could have been. But the way she said it, light, amused, turned Imani into a tool rather than a mind. A safeguard. A liability manager. Not the author. Graham laughed. "Exactly. She keeps us honest." As if honesty were a chore assigned to her, not a value she lived. The elevator chimed. Graham gestured for Liv to step in first. The doors closed behind them, sealing Imani into the small mirrored box with a woman who smelled like expensive perfume and certainty. Liv watched their reflections multiply in the polished steel. "This building is gorgeous," she said. "It tells a story." Graham's eyes lit up. "That's the idea," Liv nodded. "And stories are what people buy. Not buildings, not even returns. Stories." Imani felt the words slide through her like cold water. This was what Liv did. She didn't build structures. She built perception. And perception, in Graham's world, was worth more than truth. They stepped onto the executive floor. Glass walls, clean lines, curated minimalism. The office was a cathedral to Graham's taste. Liv walked through it like she was already imagining her name on a door. A brand alignment meeting had been scheduled in the largest conference room. Marketing, PR, two people from legal. Graham at the head, Liv at his right hand. Imani placed herself near the screen, half participant, half technician. Her position in the room reflected her position in the story. Close enough to make it work, far enough to be denied credit for it. Liv clicked her laptop and brought up a slide titled, "How? The Face of Sustainable Luxury." Imani stared at the word, face. Liv spoke with calm authority. "We have a narrow window, award season, press features, investor confidence. We need one consistent protagonist, one name attached to the innovation." Graham leaned back, pleased. "Agreed." Imani's throat tightened. "Innovation isn't a protagonist," she said. "It's a process. It has authors." Liv turned her head slowly, like someone hearing an unexpected noise. "Of course," she said, voice gentle. "But audiences don't fall in love with processes. They fall in love with heroes." Heroes. Imani felt a flash of heat behind her eyes. The hero was the one holding the microphone. The hero was never the one holding up the building. A junior PR associate raised a hand. "We've been getting questions," she said, "from niche outlets, engineers, sustainability bloggers. They want specifics. They're asking who did the timber modeling, Who ran the carbon analysis? Liv's smile didn't shift. And we answer, she said, with the message. Hale Urban's internal expertise, collaborative team, Graham's leadership ensured excellence. A legal rep cleared his throat. We should be careful. If someone can substantiate authorship claims, Graham cut him off with a small wave. We're fine. Imani's fingers curled around the edge of the table. She thought of her files, her timestamps, her emails, the quiet archive of truth. For the first time, she understood what the lipstick on the glass had actually signaled. Not just an affair, an upgrade. Liv wasn't simply a third person in their relationship. She was a title, a function, a replacement strategy. After the meeting, as people filtered out, Liv lingered. She approached Imani near the screen, smiling like they were co-conspirators. You're very composed, Liv said. Most people get emotional when they feel overlooked. Imani held her gaze. I'm not overlooked. I'm erased. Liv's smile sharpened. Words matter. Erased is inflammatory. What would you call it? Imani asked. Liv tilted her head, considering. I'd call it efficiency. In business, clarity wins. Clarity. Meaning, the narrative stays simple, and the simple narrative has one face. Graham appeared beside Liv, close enough that their shoulders nearly brushed. Everything good? He asked. Perfect, Liv replied before Imani could speak. We're aligned. Aligned. Imani watched the way Graham looked at Liv. Admiration edged with appetite. The kind of attention he rarely gave Imani anymore, unless she was fixing something. Liv met his gaze without flinching, as if she were used to being chosen, as if she had already won. Imani walked back to her desk in silence, the office around her buzzing with the afterglow of strategy. She opened her computer and stared at the folder she'd begun assembling. Quiet evidence, careful categories, a private insurance policy against being rewritten out of her own life. Outside her glass-walled corner, laughter floated down the hallway. Liv's laugh, low and intimate. The sound of someone comfortable in a story where she always gets the credit. Imani put her headphones on, not to listen to music, but to block out the sound of a narrative being built without her. Because now there were 3 people in the room, and only one of them had a title designed to make erasure look like success. The gala was supposed to be harmless, a night of polished laughter and donor badges, a room full of people congratulating one another for saving the planet in tuxedos. The Chicago Architecture Center had rented out a rooftop terrace overlooking the river, strung with warm lights that softened the skyline into something romantic. Graham called it relationship maintenance, a necessary performance, a place where deals happened between sips of champagne and compliments that meant nothing. Imani told herself she could do one night, just one. She wore a black dress that didn't sparkle, didn't beg for attention, didn't announce itself. She'd learned how to dress the way men like Graham preferred, elegant enough to elevate them, quiet enough not to compete. Her hair was pinned back, her makeup precise, her posture perfect. She looked like the version of herself that made rooms comfortable. Graham loved her like that. He arrived late, of course. He always arrived late because walking in at the right moment made the room turn toward him. Liv Carter was with him, matching his pace. She wore a dress the color of red wine and the kind of confidence that didn't need permission. When Graham smiled at donors, Liv smiled too, as if she were part of the package they were buying. Imani stood beside them and watched the pattern settle into place. Introductions happened quickly, almost carelessly. Graham didn't say, "This is Imani, the engineer behind our timber system." He said, "This is Imani, she's with us." The words slid off his tongue like she was a coat he draped over his arm. A man from a private equity group shook her hand without meeting her eyes. A woman in diamond earrings said, "You must be so proud of him," and meant it as kindness. Imani smiled until her cheeks ached. The city below glittered. The river carried reflections like secrets. The terrace buzzed with ambition, disguised as celebration. At one point, an older architect named Dean Halverson approached Graham, clapping him on the shoulder. "Hail," he boomed. "This riverfront project, people are calling it a breakthrough. You've got everyone chasing timber now." Graham laughed, modest in performance, hungry underneath. "We're pushing the future." Dean's gaze drifted to Imani. "And who's the brain keeping your towers standing?" Imani's pulse jumped. This again. The question that tried to make truth surface. Graham's hand settled at the small of her back, gentle but controlling. "We've got a great team," he said, steering the conversation away like a man moving furniture. "Imani supports the engineering details." "Supports?" Dean nodded, satisfied, already distracted by someone more loudly important. Liv's eyes flicked to Imani's face, a quick flash of amusement. Then she turned back to Graham and said something that made him laugh. Imani felt the laughter like a cold draft. She excused herself, claiming she needed air as if she weren't already outside. She moved through the crowd with care, avoiding clusters, dodging compliments, searching for a corner where her body could exist without being managed. Near the far end of the terrace, a set of French doors stood partially open, leading to an interior lounge. The sound inside was softer, muted jazz, low conversation, the clink of glasses. Imani paused by the doorway, half in shadow. That was when she heard Graham's voice, distinct, familiar, careless with privacy. He was somewhere just inside, near the bar. Liv's laughter threaded through the air. A few other voices joined, men and women whose names Imani didn't know, but whose opinions shaped careers. Graham spoke as if he owned the room. "Imani?" he said, and her name tightened something in her chest. "She's brilliant, sure, but she's not the brand." Imani froze. Liv's voice, smooth as satin. "You've done a good job making that clear." A low chuckle from a man. "So she's, what, your technical shield?" Graham laughed, the sound warm and easy. "Exactly. She keeps the math clean, keeps the sustainability folks happy. But let's be honest, people don't invest in engineers. They invest in confidence, in a story." Imani's fingers found the edge of the doorframe, gripping hard enough to whiten her knuckles. Another voice, female, curious. "But isn't the whole timber concept her?" A pause, brief as a blink. Then Graham, casually cruel. "She's nothing without Hale Urban." The words didn't arrive like a slap. They arrived like gravity. She'd still be buried in some boutique consulting firm if I hadn't pulled her into this. I gave her a platform. I made her relevant. That's just reality. Someone murmured, approving. Liv laughed softly. "And now she gets to stand beside you and look supportive. It's almost poetic." Imani felt her stomach turn. Her vision narrowed. The room swayed as if the building itself had taken a step away from her. Nothing without Hale Urban. It wasn't just the insult. It was the confidence with which he said it. The ease. The way he spoke about her as if she were an accessory he'd purchased, improved, and displayed. The way the others accepted it as normal, even clever. This wasn't a private cruelty. This was the public story he told when he thought she couldn't hear. Her phone buzzed in her clutch, vibrating against her palm like a warning. A text from Graham, as if summoned by the universe's sense of irony. "Where are you? Investors want to meet. Get back out here." Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "Where did you go?" A command. Imani stared at the screen, the glow reflecting off her skin. She thought of the glass with the wrong lipstick, Liv's nails, the brand deck titled Hale, the face, the slides with her work in his name, the way support had become her entire identity. She lifted her eyes toward the doorway. Through the opening, she could see Graham's profile at the bar, laughing, relaxed, surrounded by people who fed his ego like it was a fire they were paid to keep burning. Liv stood close at his side, her hand resting lightly on his arm as if she belonged there. Imani's heartbeat slowed, not from calm, but from something colder. Clarity. She typed one word. Number. 2 letters. A refusal so small it fit inside a message bubble, and so large it changed the shape of her life. Another buzz. Immediate. "Don't do this. You're making a scene." Imani looked out at the skyline. At the river, at the city that had made her fight for every inch of credibility. She realized she was shaking, not with fear, but with the violence of waking up. She turned away from the terrace lights and walked toward the stairwell, heels steady, shoulders squared, breath sharp in her throat. Behind her, the gala continued. Music, laughter, applause for men who sold stories they didn't build. Imani didn't run. She didn't collapse. She didn't look back. In the quiet stairwell, away from the performance, she opened her phone and played the 12-second recording she'd taken days ago. Graham's voice, saying her name and erasing it in the same breath. She saved it to a folder labeled simply Truth. Then she descended, step by step, leaving the rooftop and the old version of herself behind. Because something had ended on that terrace. Not the relationship, not yet, not officially, but the delusion. And once a delusion dies, you can never live inside it again. Nia Brooks opened the door before Imani could knock. It was past midnight, the city quiet in that uneasy way that only comes after ambition has gone to sleep. The brownstone in Bronzeville smelled like paint, old books, and something warm still lingering from dinner. Nia took one look at Imani's face, bare, stiff, holding itself together by muscle memory alone, and didn't ask a single question. She stepped aside and pulled her in. The door closed behind them with a soft, final sound. Something in Imani's chest cracked at it. "You don't have to explain yet," Nia said, already steering her toward the couch. "Sit. Breathe. Shoes off." Imani obeyed because she didn't know how not to. Because Nia's voice carried authority earned over decades of surviving things that were supposed to break her. Nia was taller than Imani, broader, unapologetic in her presence. She ran a community arts nonprofit 2 blocks away, painted murals that told stories people preferred not to hear, and had never once softened herself to be easier to consume. Imani sat, and immediately felt wrong for it. "I shouldn't be here," she said, words rushing out like a reflex. "It's late, things got weird and I needed a minute. I'll be fine." Nia turned slowly, eyebrow arching. "Stop." The single word cut clean. Imani's mouth closed. Her hands trembled in her lap, then stilled as she clasped them together. "You didn't come here for a minute," Nia said. "You came here because something broke." Imani swallowed. The room seemed too quiet now, as if waiting. Nia sat across from her, not touching yet, giving space the way someone does when they know pressure will only make the truth retreat. "Talk to me," she said, "but don't clean it up." Imani tried. She tried to start at the beginning, to narrate it like a report. The gala, the terrace, the conversation she overheard, Graham's voice, the words, "She's nothing without Hale Urban." The sentence fell into the room like a dropped plate. Imani waited for it to shatter. Nia didn't interrupt. She didn't gasp. She didn't soften her face. She listened with a stillness that felt like safety. "And then," Imani continued, voice thinning, "he texted me, like nothing had happened, like I was supposed to come back and smile and—" She stopped, breath catching. "I said no." Nia leaned forward. "Say that again." "I said no." Nia nodded slowly, like she was cataloging a fact. "Good." Imani laughed, sharp and disbelieving. "It's not good. I overreacted. I shouldn't have been listening. Maybe he didn't mean it the way it sounded. He was drinking. He's under pressure. I know how this industry is." "Stop," Nia said again, firmer this time. "Do not do that." Imani frowned. "Do what?" "Shrink the harm so you can survive it." The words hit harder than Graham's ever had. Nia stood and poured them both water, hands steady. She returned and placed the glass in front of Imani like an offering. "You're minimizing," she said, "and you're good at it. You've had practice." Imani stared at the water. "I just don't want to blow things up over one comment." "One comment?" Nia repeated. Her voice didn't rise. That was worse. "Baby, that wasn't a comment. That was a confession." Imani's throat tightened. "He didn't think I'd hear." "That's the point." Silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Imani felt something pressing behind her eyes, a pressure she'd learned to control in conference rooms, in meetings, in relationships where crying made you inconvenient. "I gave him everything," she said finally. "My work, my connections, my credibility. I made him look legitimate when he was still guessing. And he says I'm nothing." Her voice broke on the last word. Not loud, not dramatic, just honest. Naya moved then. She crossed the space and wrapped Imani in her arms, strong and unyielding. Imani resisted for half a second, then collapsed into her like a building whose supports had been quietly removed. She cried the way people cry when they've been holding it together too long. Deep, uneven, gasping sobs that scraped her throat raw. Years came out with the sound. Every time she'd swallowed an insult, every time she'd introduced herself as we, every time she'd been told to wait her turn while watching someone else take her place. "I thought love meant support," she choked. "I thought if I stayed loyal, if I didn't make it about me, it would work." Nia held her without flinching. "Love without respect is captivity," she said softly. "And you've been imprisoned with nice furniture." Imani laughed through tears, a broken sound. "He's already texting. He says I embarrassed him." Nia pulled back just enough to look her in the eye. "Of course he did." She took Imani's phone, gently but decisively, and scrolled through the messages. Her jaw tightened as she read. "Anger," she said. "Blame, gaslighting, now fake concern, textbook." Imani wiped her face with the sleeve of her dress. "I don't even know who I am without him anymore." Nia's expression softened then, but her voice didn't. "That's not because you disappeared," she said. "It's because you were taught to forget." Imani looked at her, confused. "They didn't erase you by accident," Nia continued. "They erased you because you're dangerous when you remember who you are." Imani's phone buzzed again on the table between them. Another message from Graham. She didn't read it. Nia covered the phone with her hand. "Listen to me," she said. "Tonight, you're not going back there. Not to explain, not to fix it, not to make it easier for him to sleep." Imani hesitated. "I have work, files, my laptop." "We'll get them," Nia said, "safely, later." Imani exhaled, shaky. "What if I'm wrong?" Nia smiled, slow and certain. "Then we'll deal with that. But if you're right, and you are, going back too soon will teach him that he can say anything and you'll still return." The words settled like truth. Nia stood and gestured toward the guest room. "You're staying. Shower. Sleep if you can. Tomorrow, we don't spiral. We plan." Imani nodded, exhaustion finally claiming ground. As she stood, she felt lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because she wasn't alone. Heavier because for the first time, someone had refused to let her lie to herself. At the doorway, she turned. "Nia?" "Yes." "What if I really am nothing without him?" Nia didn't hesitate. "Then explain to me," she said, eyes fierce and kind all at once. "How a man who needs to steal your work could ever be the reason you mattered." Imani closed the door behind her and leaned against it, breathing hard. For the first time in years, the voice in her head that said, "Don't make it worse," had gone quiet. And in that silence, something else began to speak. Not fear. Memory. Imani woke before the sun, not because she was rested, but because her body had decided sleep was no longer safe. The guest room at Nia's brownstone was quiet, the walls thick, the curtains drawn. For a moment she lay still, listening to the unfamiliar peace. No elevator hum, no city glare pressing through glass, no Graham moving through space like gravity itself. Her phone sat face down on the nightstand, mercifully silent. Nia had insisted on that. No notifications until morning. Your nervous system needs a ceasefire. Imani swung her legs over the side of the bed and felt the ache settle into her bones. This wasn't heartbreak. Heartbreak was dramatic. This was something colder and sharper. Clarity. In the kitchen, dawn crept through the windows in thin bands of gray. Nia was already up, coffee brewing, hair wrapped in a scarf splattered with old paint. "You ready?" Nia asked, not unkindly. Imani nodded. I don't want to talk about it, she said. I want to prove it. Nia smiled once. Good. Rants get dismissed. Receipts don't. They cleared the table together, turning it into a workspace. Imani opened her laptop, fingers hovering for a moment before touching the keys. This was the threshold. On the other side of it was no longer the story she told herself, but the one that existed, whether anyone liked it or not. She started with the shared drive, folder by folder, project by project. She copied, not deleted, not altered, every file she had touched. Structural models, simulation runs, carbon analyses, design iterations with embedded timestamps that mapped her thinking down to the minute. She preserved metadata like it was oxygen. Original file names, creation dates, revision histories, proof that her work hadn't appeared magically inside Hale Urban's ecosystem. It had been authored. Email came next. She searched her inbox with surgical precision. Graham's name, keywords like timber, fire code, revise, present, investors. The results spilled across the screen in chronological confession. Late-night messages where she explained solutions in paragraphs. Early morning replies from Graham. Great, I'll handle this. Forwarded emails to investors where her language reappeared, stripped of attribution, wearing his signature instead. One message made her pause. Sent 18 months ago. Subject line, deck cleanup. Graham's words, casual and damning. Before we send this out, let's remove individual names. Keeps things clean. Clean. Imani saved it twice. Once locally, once to an encrypted cloud folder Nia had helped her set up before dawn. She didn't cry. That surprised her. The tears had already done their work the night before. What remained was focus, the kind that narrowed her world to the size of a screen and a mission. Slack exports followed, meeting notes, calendar invites that placed her in rooms where decisions were made, even when the press releases later pretended she'd never been there. She documented patterns, not moments. Volume mattered. Consistency mattered. This wasn't about proving one insult. It was about exposing a system. By mid-morning, the table was covered in notebooks filled with her tight handwriting, dates, project names, cross-references. Nia moved quietly around her, occasionally placing water within reach, occasionally asking a question that sharpened the edge. Did he ever explicitly assign IP? No, Imani said without looking up, just vague language. Work product developed in collaboration. No signatures, no scope. Good, Nia said. Ambiguity cuts both ways. Imani opened the contract next. The consulting agreement she'd signed years ago, back when she'd still believed proximity to power was a form of power. She read it now like a stranger, seeing the gaps she'd ignored. No clear work for hire clause for original designs. No assignment of copyrights for specific innovations. Plenty of language about confidentiality, almost none about credit. She exhaled slowly. This wasn't just emotional, it was structural. At noon, her phone buzzed. She flipped it face up. Graham, a wall of messages stacked like accusations. This is childish. We need to talk. You embarrassed me. People noticed. You're overreacting. I didn't mean it like that. I'm worried about you. Imani stared at the progression with a strange detachment. Anger, blame, gaslight, concern. Nia had called it last night with unnerving accuracy. She didn't respond. Instead, she took screenshots. Each one went into a folder labeled pattern. She added notes, timing, language shifts, emotional triggers. Not because she planned to show them to the internet, but because she was done being told she imagined things. Documentation was a form of self-respect. By late afternoon, the folder on her desktop had a name. WARD_original_work. Inside it were subfolders by project, each containing evidence stacked so neatly it was almost beautiful. Truth had a shape now. Weight. Gravity. Imani leaned back in her chair and finally let herself breathe. "This is insane," she said quietly. "I built his reputation." Nia, standing in the doorway, nodded. "And now you're taking yourself back." Imani closed her laptop, hands resting on the lid like a promise. This was the difference between who she had been and who she was becoming. Before, she had tried to explain herself. Now, she was preparing to prove herself. Outside, the city stirred awake again. Somewhere downtown, Graham Hale was still telling a story where he was the center, still assuming she would come back, apologize, make it easier. He didn't know yet. But soon, he would. Because rants could be ignored, receipts could not. Imani returned to the Gold Coast apartment at 8:17 p.m., not because she missed it, but because she needed what was inside. She had dressed for invisibility. Dark jeans, a plain coat, hair pulled back, no jewelry, nothing that could be grabbed, nothing that could be used to pull her into a performance. Nia waited in the car downstairs, engine running, a quiet promise of an exit. Imani rode the elevator up alone, 40 floors of silence. Her heartbeat kept time with the numbers above the door. When she unlocked the apartment, the air hit her first. Citrus cleaner, expensive cologne, and the faint sweetness of a perfume that still didn't belong. The place looked perfect, untouched. The same marble counters, the same art on the walls, the same careful light that made everything feel like a magazine spread. A life designed to look like success. Graham was in the living room with a tumbler in his hand, as if he'd been waiting in the exact pose that would make him seem calm. He looked up and smiled like nothing had happened. "There you are," he said, relief and irritation braided together in his voice. "Jesus, Imani, where did you go?" Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "I'm sorry, where did you go?" As if she were property left in the wrong place. Imani didn't take off her coat. "I heard you," she said. Graham blinked, still smiling. "Heard me?" "At the gala," she continued. Her voice didn't shake. "On the terrace. Inside. You told people I'm nothing without Hale Urban. That you made me relevant." The smile stayed on his face for half a second too long. Then it adjusted, like a mask being reseated. "Imani," he said gently, as if speaking to a child who'd misunderstood a movie. "You're taking things out of context." She almost laughed. The line was so predictable, it felt scripted. "Out of context?" she repeated. "Explain the context where that's acceptable." Graham's jaw tightened. He set his glass down with exaggerated care, a performance of restraint. "Look," he said, "I had a few drinks. People were talking. You know how those events are. Everyone's posturing. Don't make it bigger than it is." He took a step toward her. "And you disappearing? That was dramatic. Investors were asking where you were." Imani held his gaze. "They asked who engineered the timber system." Graham waved a hand, impatient. "And we handled it." "We?" She felt. "You handled it by erasing me," she said. Again, his expression shifted, irritation slipping through. "It's not erasing, it's branding." Branding. As if her identity were a logo that clashed with his color palette. "Investors want one voice," he continued, now slipping into the tone he used for negotiations. "Reasonable, authoritative. One leader, a singular vision. That's how this works." "So you erased me to protect the project," Imani said, head tilting slightly. "You erased me to protect me." He spread his hands. "Exactly." The audacity of it landed like a slap. Imani's voice stayed calm, almost clinical. "That's not protection. That's theft with nice lighting." Graham's eyes narrowed. "Don't be dramatic." "I'm not being dramatic," she said. "I'm being accurate." He took another sip of air. He was recalibrating, she realized, deciding which version of himself would work best. Charming Graham, wounded Graham, threatening Graham. He tried charming first. "Imani," he said softly, "you're talented. I've always said that. But you have to understand the reality. This city is brutal. People don't rally behind engineers. They rally behind founders. I gave you a platform, stability, access, security. Without Hale Urban, you'd be struggling. There it was. The familiar condescension dressed up as concern. Imani felt a cold clarity settle in her chest. Before you met me, she said, you were building generic condos and calling it innovation. I was already in rooms you weren't invited to. I brought you credibility. His face changed. Not guilt, not shame, anger, like she'd violated an unspoken contract. You don't speak the truth out loud. That's what this is, he snapped. You want credit? You want your name on things? Fine. We can talk about that like adults. But disappearing, humiliating me, this attention-seeking behavior, it's beneath you. Attention-seeking. Imani stared at him, stunned by how quickly he had made her pain into a personality flaw. And live? She asked quietly. Graham froze. A fraction of a second where his eyes flickered. Calculation, then deflection. What about Liv? You're sleeping with her. His mouth tightened. Then he shrugged, the gesture casual in a way that was almost monstrous. It's not serious. Imani's breath caught. She's convenient, he added, as if describing a dry cleaner. The room went very still. You cheated, Imani said, voice finally cracking on the word. You stole my work. You told strangers I was nothing. And you're standing here acting like I'm the problem. Graham stepped closer, the air around him sharpening. He used his height the way he always did when he wanted to win, leaning in, filling her space, forcing her body to register him as a threat. You need to calm down, he said. Imani didn't move back. I am calm. You're not thinking clearly, he said, voice low. You're emotional. She recognized the trap. Emotional meant irrational. Emotional meant dismissible. Emotional meant he wouldn't have to address the truth. Imani met his eyes. I'm thinking clearer than I have in years. Graham's patience snapped. The mask slid. You know what? He said, voice hard now. Fine, let's be honest. You're good at what you do, but you don't have the relationships to survive alone. You don't have the political capital. You don't have the charisma. People don't follow you. They follow me. There it was. The worldview. The reason he could say she was nothing. Imani felt something inside her go quiet, not defeated, finished. I came for my laptop, she said, turning slightly toward the hallway. Graham's eyes widened, just a little. Imani, don't do this. I'm not leaving tonight, she said evenly. I'm taking what's mine. His laugh was sharp. What's yours? Imani turned back to him fully, and for the first time since she'd met him, her gaze didn't ask for permission. My work, she said. My authorship, my name. You don't have anything, he said. Imani held his stare for a long, silent beat. Then she reached into her coat pocket, pulled out her phone, and let her thumb hover over a folder labeled Truth. I do. The air between them, Graham laughed first. Not loud, dismissive. The sound of a man who had never believed consequences applied to him. Imani, he said, shaking his head, you don't seriously think you can threaten me? I'm not threatening you, she replied. Her voice surprised even her, steady, almost detached. I'm informing you. She walked past him toward the hallway, each step deliberate. Graham followed, irritation sharpening into something more dangerous. Don't be stupid, he said. You're emotional right now. You'll regret burning bridges you don't understand. She stopped and turned. I understand them perfectly. You just assumed I'd never cross one. That was the boundary. Clear, unapologetic, and it landed harder than shouting ever could. Graham stepped closer, lowering his voice. Listen to me. I made calls for you. I put my reputation on the line. Without Hale Urban, you don't have clients. You don't have access. You don't have a future in this city. Imani met his gaze. Without my work, you don't have a reputation. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. She moved into the office and reached for her laptop bag. Graham's hand shot out. Not violent, not bruising, but firm enough to remind her how often he'd redirected her this way before. A controlling touch disguised as familiarity. "Don't," he said quietly. "Don't make an enemy of me." Imani looked down at his hand on her wrist. The moment stretched, heavy with everything unsaid. "Take your hand off me," she said. "Or what?" His tone was low, testing. "Or I start with the riverfront investors," she replied calmly, "and explain who engineered the system backing their 8-figure commitment. Then I move on to the city inspectors, the sustainability board, the journalists writing about your singular vision. I show them timestamps, emails, version histories, receipts." His grip loosened, just slightly. "You wouldn't," he said, but the certainty was gone. "I would," she said, "because I'm done protecting you." He released her hand, as if burned. Imani picked up her laptop, slid it into her bag, then turned to the bookshelf. She grabbed a slim notebook, her original sketches, handwritten, dated. Graham watched her now with something close to panic. "You're blowing this out of proportion," he said, scrambling for control. "We can fix this. We can renegotiate. Therapy, mediation. I'll put your name on future projects." "Future," she repeated. "You've been promising that for years." He softened, switching tactics again. "We were good together, you know that. We balanced each other." "No," she said, and felt the truth settle. "You balanced yourself on my back." She walked toward the bedroom to pack essentials. Graham followed, his voice rising. "You leave now and I will bury you. I'll make sure no one hires you. I'll tell everyone you rode my coattails." Imani paused at the doorway. "That story only works if people believe it," she said. "And they won't." She packed methodically. Clothes, charger, documents. Not everything, just enough. Enough to leave cleanly. Enough to not come back alone. Graham stood in the doorway, watching his control unravel in real time. "You need me," he said, desperation leaking through. "You can't do this alone." Imani zipped the bag and lifted it onto her shoulder. She felt lighter than she had in years. "I was something before you," she said. "I'll be something after you. The only nothing here is what I allowed myself to become." She walked past him. In the hallway, she stopped once more, not to look at him, but to mark the moment. "This is the last conversation we have without lawyers," she said. "Do not contact me again." She opened the door and stepped into the hallway. The apartment door closed behind her with a soft, final click. Inside, Graham Hale stood alone in a space that suddenly felt too quiet, too large, too empty of the woman who had made it possible. In the elevator, as it descended floor by floor, Imani finally let her breath shake. Her reflection stared back at her, eyes red, posture upright, holding one bag and an entire future she would have to rebuild from scratch. She looked terrified. She looked free. And somewhere above her, a man who had always believed she'd stay was learning the most dangerous lesson of all. When the woman you underestimated draws a boundary, it isn't the end of the conversation. It's the end of your control. The lawyer's office sat on the 22nd floor of a building that didn't advertise itself. No gold lettering in the lobby, no inspirational quotes on the walls. Just stone, glass, and silence. The kind of quiet that suggested people came here when politeness had failed them. Imani arrived 10 minutes early and spent all 10 staring out the window at Lake Michigan, gray and restless. She had changed clothes but not posture. Her body still carried the echo of the night before. The elevator descent, the click of the door, the way freedom and fear had arrived together. The door opened behind her. "Imani Ward?" a voice asked. She turned. Tessa Lynn was smaller than Imani expected. Mid-40s, sharp black suit, hair pulled back with ruthless efficiency. Her eyes were calm in a way that made other people nervous, as if she had already seen the worst and found it manageable. "Come in," Tessa said, "and close the door." The office was spare. Desk, 2 chairs, no personal photos, no softening details. A legal battlefield stripped of sentiment. Imani sat and placed her laptop bag at her feet like a shield. Tessa didn't ask how she was. She didn't offer water. She opened a folder and looked directly at her. "Tell me what he did," she said, "and don't protect him." Something in Imani's chest loosened. She told her everything. Not in the polished language she'd learned at conferences, but plainly. The gala, the terrace, the words, the erasure, the files, the threats. She slid her laptop across the desk and opened the folder labeled Ward _original _work. Tessa watched without interrupting, fingers steepled, eyes tracking details most people missed. When Imani finished, the room went quiet. Finally, Tessa spoke. "He's not just a narcissist," she said. "He's a predator with a spreadsheet." Imani blinked. "That's accurate." Tessa nodded. "Men like Graham Hale don't steal because they need to. They steal because they can. Because the system rewards confidence over contribution and punishes women who object." She scrolled through the files with swift precision. "This is good," she said. "Very good. Metadata intact. Timelines consistent. Patterns clear." Imani leaned forward. "Do I actually have a case?" Tessa met her gaze. "You have leverage." The word landed heavy and electric. She turned her screen so Imani could see. "We're looking at misappropriation of intellectual property, unjust enrichment, breach of implied partnership, and potentially defamation if his statements have harmed your professional standing." "What about the contract?" Imani asked. Tessa smiled slightly. "Ambiguous, which is excellent for you. He assumed you'd never challenge it." Imani exhaled slowly. "What does this look like?" "That depends on what you want," Tessa said. "There are 3 outcomes in cases like this: money, credit, or destruction." Imani hesitated. The word destruction tasted bitter. "I don't want to burn everything down," she said. "I want my work back, my name, and compensation for what he took." Tessa's smile sharpened. "That's the most dangerous option." "Why?" "Because men like him can survive losing money. They can even survive public humiliation. What they cannot survive is the truth told calmly, legally, and on the record." Imani felt a shiver run through her. Not fear, but recognition. Tessa continued. "We file at a strategic moment, before awards season peaks, before the press cycle finishes building his mythology. We don't scream, we document." "In retaliation?" Imani asked. "He threatened to blacklist me." Tessa's eyes hardened. "Let him try. Retaliation strengthens your case, and I will bury him in his own email threads." Imani laughed despite herself. It burst out of her, sharp and startled. Tessa closed the folder. "One more thing," she said. "This process will be ugly. He will deny, deflect, attack your credibility, suggest you're emotional, suggest you're bitter, suggest you're difficult." Imani nodded. "He already has." Tessa leaned forward. "Good. That means he's predictable." She slid a document across the desk. "These are next steps. Do not contact him again. Save everything. Do not explain yourself to anyone. Silence is power now." Imani picked up the paper, her hands steady. As she stood to leave, Tessa added, "One last question." "Yes? Are you ready to be seen?" Imani thought of the terrace, the laughter, the word nothing. She thought of the receipts sitting on her hard drive like a quiet army. "Yes," she said. Tessa nodded. "Good, because once we start, there's no going back to being invisible." Imani stepped back into the elevator, the city unfolding below her, and for the first time since everything had shattered, she felt something solid beneath her feet. Not safety, ground. Rebuilding didn't arrive with a swell of music or a decisive sunrise. It arrived in fragments. Imani moved into the spare room at Nia's place with one suitcase and a laptop that felt heavier than it should have. The room was small, the bed too soft, the walls painted a color that tried to be cheerful. On the first night, she lay awake until dawn, body exhausted, mind wired, replaying conversations she wished she'd interrupted sooner. This was the part no one posted about. The mornings were the hardest. She would wake with a jolt, heart racing, convinced she was late for a meeting she no longer attended. Her phone, now stripped of Graham's name, filtered, blocked, sat silent, but her nervous system didn't trust the quiet. Silence, she was learning, could feel like danger before it felt like peace. Therapy started the second week. EMDR, the therapist explained gently, because prolonged professional and emotional coercion rewires how the brain assesses threat. Imani nodded, intellectualizing as she always did, until the first session cracked something open, and she cried in a way that left her shaking, embarrassed by how much grief had been stored in her shoulders, her jaw, her breath. "You weren't weak," the therapist said. "You were adapting." That sentence stayed with her. Some days rebuilding looked like progress, setting up a small workspace in the corner of Nia's dining room, buying new drafting software with money that felt terrifying to spend, emailing an old professor who had once told her, "Don't let them make you small." Other days, it looked like paralysis, staring at a blank screen, doubting every instinct, wondering if Graham had been right, that without his infrastructure, his access, his name, she was just another black woman with too much talent and not enough protection. Nia noticed everything. When Imani forgot to eat, food appeared beside her. When she spiraled, Nia interrupted with facts. When she minimized, "It wasn't that bad. Maybe I should have handled it better." Nia shut it down with a look that had ended many bad ideas before. "You don't heal by pretending it didn't hurt," she said. "You heal by telling the truth until your body believes it." The legal process moved in parallel, slow and ominous. Tessa sent updates in precise language. No contact from opposing counsel yet. Media monitoring ongoing. Do not respond if he reaches out. He did, of course. New numbers. Emails routed through assistants. Messages that oscillated between apology and accusation. "We built something together. You're overreacting. This is beneath you. I'm worried about you." Imani didn't reply. She saved everything. Progress was not linear. One afternoon, a former colleague ran into her downtown and said, with genuine confusion, "So are you still with Hale Urban?" The question sent her into a bathroom stall where she shook for 10 minutes, lungs refusing to cooperate. That night, she dreamed she was back in the conference room, watching slides of her work appear under someone else's name, while her mouth filled with water, and she couldn't speak. The therapist called it grief for a self that had survived by disappearing. What surprised Imani most was how physical the rebuilding was. Her body resisted rest. Her shoulders stayed tense even when she slept. Loud voices in cafes made her flinch. Authority figures triggered a reflexive compliance she had to consciously interrupt. She learned to say things like, "I need time to think about that," and sit in the discomfort that followed. Slowly, evidence of her life before Graham resurfaced. An old sustainability forum reached out after she updated her LinkedIn. Not grand, just factual. A former grad school peer sent a message. "I've been wondering where you went. Your work mattered to me." A nonprofit developer asked if she'd consult on a community retrofit project. Small budget, big values. The first time someone hired her using only her name, she cried in the shower where no one could hear. She set rules for herself. No working past midnight. No apologizing for expertise. No saying yes without a pause. These boundaries felt unnatural, like writing with her non-dominant hand, but each one strengthened a muscle she hadn't known she was allowed to use. Rebuilding wasn't glamorous. It was lonely. It was slow. It was learning to trust her own voice again without waiting for permission to use it. One evening, weeks in, Imani sat alone at the table, sketches spread out, the city humming beyond the windows. She realized she had been working for 3 hours without checking her phone once. The thought startled her. Not because she missed him, because she didn't. The work in front of her was imperfect, unfinished, unmistakably hers. No brand voice smoothing it, no smile dodging the truth. Just ideas, raw and alive. Rebuilding wasn't a montage. It was this, showing up when no one was watching. Choosing herself when it was easier not to. Letting the ache exist without letting it decide the future. And somewhere in that quiet, unremarkable persistence, Imani felt something begin to return. Not confidence, not triumph, but something sturdier. Our own shirt of her time, of her work, of the woman she was becoming, piece by careful piece. The email arrived on a Thursday afternoon, quiet and unassuming, the way real turning points often do. Imani almost didn't open it. Her inbox had become a strange landscape since leaving Hale Urban. Too empty in places that used to hum, too loud in others with legal updates, archived messages, reminders of a life she was actively dismantling. This email sat in the middle of it all with a subject line that didn't beg for attention. Inquiry, South Shore Cooperative Retrofit. She read it once, then again. The sender was Marisol Vega, director of a small but respected cooperative development group on the South Side. They were acquiring an abandoned brick warehouse near the lake, former light manufacturing, structurally sound, historically ignored. The city wanted affordable housing. The community wanted something that didn't feel like charity or displacement. They wanted sustainable. They wanted honest. And someone had told Marisol to call Imani Ward. Not Hale Urban, not Graham Hale's firm, not the team. Her. Imani closed her laptop and pressed her palms flat against the table, grounding herself. Her first instinct was disbelief. Her second was fear. The old voice rose quickly, efficient and cruel. You're not ready. What if you fail? What if this was a mistake? Then another voice, quieter, steadier, answered back. What if you don't? They met the following Monday at a cafe in Hyde Park, the kind with scratched wooden tables and flyers taped to the walls advertising poetry readings and tenant meetings. Marisol arrived early, mid-40s, silver threaded through her dark hair, eyes alert and assessing. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. I've seen your work, Marisol said, sliding a folder across the table. Not the press version, the technical papers, the community presentations you did before Hale Urban went opaque. Imani felt something in her chest loosen. You found those? Marisol smiled. Good work has a way of resurfacing. They talked for 2 hours, about load paths in daylighting, about carbon costs in lived experience, about how buildings could heal or harm depending on who they were built for. Marisol asked questions that assumed Imani knew the answers. She didn't interrupt. She didn't redirect credit. She listened. At the end, she closed the folder. I want you to lead this, she said simply. Design, engineering coordination, sustainability strategy. Your name on the contract. Your vision. The words landed softly, then all at once. Imani swallowed. The budget is modest. Marisol nodded. So is our ego. They both laughed, and something in Imani's body unclenched. The contract came through a week later. Clean, clear, her name at the top. Lead sustainability engineer and design consultant, Imani Ward. No asterisks, no euphemisms, no quiet erasure. She signed it with hands that trembled, only slightly. The first site visit happened on a gray morning, wind off the lake cutting sharp through her coat. The building loomed solid and scarred, red brick darkened by decades of neglect. Broken windows, rusted doors, a structure that had been written off. Imani stood across the street and felt something like recognition. Inside, the space was raw, concrete floors, exposed beams, light slicing through gaps in the roof. She walked slowly, imagining what it could become. Affordable units with real sunlight, shared spaces that encouraged connection instead of isolation, sustainable systems that weren't cosmetic but integral. This wasn't a vanity project. No awards committee would be dazzled by it, but it mattered. And that mattered to her. She worked differently now, slower, more deliberately. She checked in with her body, noticed when her shoulders tightened, when the urge to overwork tried to masquerade as dedication. She set boundaries with herself the way she was learning to set them with others. When a city official questioned her assumptions, she defended them without apology. When a contractor talked over her, she interrupted. When doubt crept in, she answered it with preparation instead of self-blame. One afternoon, standing in the half-lit space with Marisol and two community representatives, she presented her preliminary plan. No slides polished for investors, just clear drawings, honest numbers, and a vision rooted in respect. The room went quiet when she finished. "This feels like someone actually thought about us," one of the residents said. Imani felt her throat tighten. They approved the plan unanimously. That night, alone in her small workspace, she opened her laptop and saved the files under a new folder. Ward, South Shore Co-op. No shared drive, no brand overlay, just her work, named plainly, owned completely. Her phone buzzed. A message from Tessa. "We've received first contact from Hale Urban's legal team. They're nervous." Imani stared at the screen for a moment, then set the phone face down. For the first time, the noise from her old life felt distant, secondary. She stood by the window, looking out at the city she'd almost let convince her she was nothing without the right man beside her. The lights blinked on one by one, imperfect, alive. This wasn't a comeback. It wasn't revenge. It was something quieter, stronger. Her first win hadn't come with applause or headlines. It came with a contract that told the truth, a building that needed her, and the undeniable knowledge that she had earned this, alone, intact, and finally, fully seen. The first letter arrived on a Friday at 4:42 p.m. Tessa forwarded it with a single line of text. "They're testing the water. Don't react." Imani read it twice anyway. The tone was what she'd come to expect from men who had never been told no by anyone who mattered. Polite, firm, wounded. Hale Urban's legal counsel expressed surprise at the allegations, disappointment at the escalation, and confidence that the matter could be resolved privately and amicably. Privately, amicably. Imani closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair. Outside, the city was slipping into evening, the sky bruised purple over the lake. Somewhere downtown, Graham Hale was pacing, calculating, still convinced this was a misunderstanding he could smooth over with the right language. He was wrong. Tessa called an hour later. "They want to settle," she said, quietly. Imani didn't answer right away. Settlement. The word carried weight. Relief and grief braided together. It meant no trial, no witness stand, no months of being dissected in public by men paid to make her look unreliable. It also meant something else, less visible, more dangerous. It meant Graham wanted the story contained. "What are the terms?" Imani asked. Tessa didn't hesitate. Non-disclosure. Mutual non-disparagement. A lump sum that sounds generous if you don't do the math. No admission of wrongdoing. Imani felt a familiar tightening in her chest. The old reflex to accept, to be reasonable, to make things easier. "And credit?" she asked. A pause. "That's where it gets interesting," Tessa said. "They're resisting." Of course they were. Money could be written off. Silence could be enforced. But credit rewrote the narrative. Credit named the thief. "I won't agree without it," Imani said quietly. Tessa smiled on the other end of the line. Imani could hear it. "I was hoping you'd say that." The second letter arrived the following Tuesday, this one more urgent. Hale Urban's counsel softened their language, acknowledging collaborative contributions and offering to include her name in internal acknowledgments. Internal, invisible, meaningless. Tessa responded with a document that read less like a negotiation and more like a mirror. Exhibits, timelines, screenshots, metadata, emails with phrases like "remove individual names" highlighted in unforgiving yellow, a summary of potential claims laid out with surgical calm, misappropriation, unjust enrichment, defamation, retaliation. And then the line that shifted everything. "Client reserves the right to correct the public record." The third call came directly from Graham, not to Imani, to Tessa. He was angry now. Tessa relayed it later with clinical detachment. He accused Imani of betrayal, of ingratitude, of trying to destroy him. He insisted she was overreacting, that this was a misunderstanding blown out of proportion by lawyers. When that didn't work, he pivoted. He offered more money. Tessa countered with terms that made the room go quiet. Full public acknowledgement of Imani Ward's authorship and leadership on all disputed projects. Financial compensation calculated at market rate for her role, retroactive. Return of intellectual property rights for specific innovations. A written statement issued through Hale Urban's official channels, press, website, and investor communications, using her full professional title. No euphemisms, no support, no team. An architect does not disappear. An engineer does not evaporate. Graham balked. His legal team warned him. Awards season loomed. A major design publication was preparing a feature on his singular vision. The risk calculus shifted with every passing hour. On Thursday night, Tessa called Imani again. "They're folding," she said, "but he wants one thing." Imani closed her eyes. "Let me guess. He wants you to agree not to speak publicly beyond the statement. No interviews about the dispute. No commentary." Imani considered it. Not for long. "Fine," she said, "as long as the statement is clear and permanent." "It will be," Tessa replied. "He doesn't have leverage anymore." The settlement was finalized 2 weeks later. The money arrived first, a number large enough to represent years of unpaid labor, small enough to remind her what he'd taken. Imani transferred a portion immediately, student loans, savings, a quiet donation to Nia's nonprofit. The rest she left untouched for a day, just to feel the truth of it. Then came the statement. It went live on a Tuesday morning, released with corporate precision. Many of Hale Urban's most acclaimed sustainable developments were collaborative efforts with architect and sustainability engineer Imani Ward, whose design leadership and technical vision were instrumental to the firm's success. Instrumental. The word landed like a bell. Imani read it again, slower this time. Her name, her title. No softening language, no erasure. Her phone lit up within minutes. Colleagues she hadn't heard from in years. Former classmates. Journalists asking careful questions. A message from Marisol. About damn time. And then, inevitably, the speculation. The quiet acknowledgments. The knowing silences from people who had suspected something but chosen not to ask. Graham didn't contact her again, but she heard about him. About the glass thrown against his office wall. About the awards committee suddenly re-evaluating. About the uncomfortable questions he couldn't charm his way around anymore. Imani sat at her desk that evening, the settlement agreement closed, the city humming beyond the window. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt accurate. The public record had been corrected, not with rage, not with spectacle, but with truth, documented and enforced. This wasn't about punishment. It was about authorship. And once the truth is written down where everyone can see it, it has a way of standing, quiet, unmovable, and impossible to erase again. The message arrived from a number she didn't recognize, late enough that the city outside her window had softened into scattered lights and quiet resolve. Imani almost deleted it without reading. Almost. I saw the statement, the article. Your project on the South Side. I'm proud of you. I always knew you had this kind of potential. Her thumb hovered, then scrolled. I'm starting something new. Miami this time. Bigger scope, real partnership, your name on everything, equal footing. We were good together, Imani. We can be again. There it was. Not an apology, not accountability, a rewrite. The audacity of it was almost elegant. The way he framed her success as proof of his vision. The way he positioned himself as the gateway she'd merely walked through instead of the obstacle she'd survived. I always knew. As if he hadn't spent years insisting she was nothing without him. Imani leaned back in her chair and let the moment pass through her without rushing to fill it. The studio around her was quiet, sketches pinned to the wall, models half-built, a plant she kept forgetting to water but that somehow kept growing anyway. Outside, Chicago breathed, unfinished, alive, unapologetic. She thought of the terrace, The word nothing. The boundary he hadn't believed she'd hold. She typed slowly, carefully. Graham, I don't need partnership with someone who only sees my value after losing control of it. I don't need validation from someone who tried to erase me. Please stop contacting me. This is my final response. She hit send. Then she blocked the number. Then she set a filter. Any message containing his name would disappear without asking her permission. Done. Weeks passed. Her work didn't slow. If anything, it expanded. More inquiries. More rooms where her voice wasn't managed, only heard. People didn't introduce her as with anyone anymore. They said her name, and it stood on its own. One evening, as she prepared notes for a talk she'd been invited to give, on authorship, on ethics, on building without theft, she caught her reflection in the darkened window. No careful armor, no rehearsed smile, just herself, steady and present. She thought about how close she'd come to believing the lie, how easy it would have been to stay small, to stay silent, to accept proximity as power. How dangerous it was, for him, that she hadn't. Imani understood something now that no settlement document could ever capture. Men like Graham don't come back because they've changed. They come back because you have. Because your distance terrifies them. Because your wholeness exposes the truth they've been hiding from themselves. Because once you become unstoppable, your absence becomes unbearable. She closed her laptop and stood, the city stretching endlessly ahead of her. Projects waiting, voices rising, futures not yet imagined. She had been told she was nothing without him, and he would spend the rest of his life proving she was everything without him. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been erased, underestimated, or told your worth depended on someone else, like this, share it and follow the channel. Stories like this don't just entertain, they remind us who we are. And sometimes, remembering is all it takes to become unstoppable.